So we're all connecting the same ideas about reflection, models of reflection. Remember the stages of reflection and how that connects to reflexivity, but we'll get there next week. But it is all interconnected. These two terms are interrelated. It's so difficult to separate them because it's like a concentric circle. To be reflexive, you need to be reflective. So they're all communicating. We'll look at these three key points. So what makes a reflection critical, and how we can practice our reflective skills. How do we perform reflective practice? How many ways are there? And which ones have you practiced in the past that you may not know or didn't know before? And you're like, oh, I do that. That's why I'm reflective, you know. And again, there's a brief introduction about the terms of reflexive and reflexivity. So, critical reflection. What makes a reflection critical? We have seen that although we have different models of reflection, it's always about questioning the assumptions that we make of the world. So, what are the things that you take for granted that you know of, and usually don't question them because that's how you know life and what you know about things, how things work. So it's basically analyzing those assumptions and linking those assumptions with the context, how you impact others, and what else? Yourself, others, and beyond. We'll see that critical, how other authors understand the idea of critical. But if you are examining your assumptions, then you're being critical. That's like the underlining or underpinning ideas. Now, if you're becoming aware of those assumptions, if you're asking yourself questions at a personal level, emotional level, and not emotional altogether, social level, cultural level, historical level, and you get to the political level. Usually some specific academics, when they talk about being critical in reflection, they refer to these two elements, the historical and the political. How does that impact then the history of human beings, of this specific context and the politics around this context? But the reality is that it involves all of them. Reviewing assumptions, re-evaluating, creating new, different understandings of those assumptions is important. Yes, and as long as you get to that ultimate goal, which is reshaping, reworking, re-understanding, reaffirming knowledge, if you cover all these bases, you've been critical in your reflections. That's Watson and Wilcox. If I'm pronouncing them right, I really don't know. But there's more ideologies, and again, these all ideologies, they talk to each other, but it's not always the case that this is very explicit in the literature. You find people like Messiwell, whose positioning, the paradigm of his work is based on the field of critical ideologies. And what he says is also very similar to what in other fields they say about what critical reflection is. So Messiwell, for instance, talks about the idea of, seeing, recognizing how uncritically accepted and unjust, so we're going to the ideas of justice, how those dominant ideologies shape who we are, our everyday situations. If you have lived somewhere abroad in a different country, you know that there are specific ideologies about how you should behave as a man, how you should behave as a woman, and that impacts how we think. We also have ideas about reassessment of life, that area that is a psychological area of self-examining your feelings, exploring and planning rules, negotiation skills, and building confidence. And that is part of what should be embedded in the reflective cycle. So this is something that you should be analyzing when you're talking about doing a critical reflection. So how are you negotiating your understandings of a situation that you experience? Self-examination. Feelings are important in this field of reassessment of life because you're talking about your life. So if you have read the work Kurtz, for instance, Kurtz as a psychologist who works in the professional health field, for her, this idea is very relevant because you need to self-examine your practice in order to have an impact with your, call them clients, call them patients. You need to build that confidence in order to give and provide the best version of yourself in that service of well-being and health. Now, we also have ideas from Brookfield. And we go back to the assumptions and always questioning what you know and why you know what you know. So what do you know and why do you know this? How did you get to this knowledge? How does the context shape that knowledge? And what actions do you perform in order to do something that is in line with your values? And we did talk a lot about values in the first week. We go back to those ideas of what's important to you, because what's important to you is what you're expected to enact in real life, and goes back to those ideas of assumptions and how we live our lives. Exploration of beliefs, feelings, and actions. Again, that's something of those three key elements, I would say. If we were to summarize these ideas, then we have three dimensions. We have the cognitive dimension, what we learn, our learnings, what we know, how that knowledge is shaped. Then we have the affective dimension, feelings. And then we have the behavior dimensions, our actions, what we do. And in summary, these three dimensions are key when we talk about critical reflection. We did see the ideas of reflection as a meaning-making process. So we're always reflecting on experience, in experience, for experience. If we go back to the ideas of Shun, it's a spiral, it's a continuum of spirals that goes, for the rest of our lives. Now that continuum, the whole bunch of everything that we are connected from past, present, and future is very linked to what we refer to as reflexivity. So the continuum of reflections, if you want, is what we mean when we talk about reflexivity. But there's another dimension in the ideas of reflexivity that are different from just ideas of reflection, because reflection talks a lot about how the individual relates to the context, whereas reflexivity talks a lot about the individual and the context altogether, how they coexist. Yeah, there's a danger of not being reflective enough about how we act, how others act, and that is one of the constraints of not being critical enough, reflective enough. We can reinforce stereotypes about people. And that's something that it is part of making sure that if you are engaging with critical reflection, whatever you analyze, you develop an understanding of what people do, why they do what they do, and you're kind of fine with that, understanding that, accepting that things are sometimes as they are and there's nothing we can change, but becoming aware of those shaping influences is important. Then we have Smith. Elizabeth Smith proposes a really interesting framework that a lot of people have used now when they talk about critical reflection. And she goes back to those ideas, knowledge, thoughts, actions, feelings, then connects them in concentric circles to the context, to that political context that we were saying before. So hopefully you'll see that figure in 2 minutes. Yeah, that's the same. Yes, critical reflection goes back to the notions of critical thinking. How do you know you've been a critical thinker? How do you develop your critical skills? Again, by analyzing your experiences, assumptions, beliefs, feelings, the context. And then we have this figure that is based on the work of Sean, the work of Brooke Hughes. So reflective thinking starts with you. You revisit your experience, you examine your assumptions, values, attitudes, beliefs. So if you're writing a reflective account, the idea is that you let the reader get to know you very deeply of who you are. But also, the idea of critical thinking is that then, okay, as you are justifying your actions, you're rationalizing what you do and why you do what you do, then the idea is that you are, in a way, suggesting change, solving a situation, dealing with a situation. You don't necessarily need to solve a situation because some situations are as they are, but it's showing that you know how to deal with a new experience or something that is puzzling to you. That's at an individual level. Now, what Smith, and I'm just going to show this very quick, says, well, okay, let's talk about critical reflection, but let's start with us, our personal thoughts, actions, then our relationship with others, how those contexts where we interact, our family, friends, school, shape our thoughts and actions. But then also, and this is more in the academic field, what theories, methods, concepts that you read and engage with as you're learning about your profession, what kind of work is impacting your knowledge? It's very, very, very funny because what we read, or we tend to read authors, people that, or whose ideas are in line with us, isn't it? We're like, oh, okay, so if those ideas are in line with your own values, then it is important that you're transparent about what's informing those ideas and your knowledge. And more importantly, why you reject other people's ideas. So that's including the theory, the methods, what's the knowledge out there, the existing knowledge that is available to us in our profession. And pushing all that, those elements to the critical. And for me, the critical comprises the political and the social context. So if you see education as a political issue, then what do you do in your practice as a teacher to get there and impact that political context? And it's the same in every other profession. What do you do in your practice that impacts the political and social context? So that's basically one of the readings that you do. And then on page 219 of that reading, you'll see how Liz Smith discloses, each one of the domains, from the self-critical, what kind of questions you can ask yourself, what kind of questions you can ask yourself when you're reflecting on how others or your interactions with others shape your beliefs, ideas, and knowledge. Questions to ask yourself when you're analyzing the contextual domain. And finally, questions that you can ask yourself when to connect and think about that political and social context. So in a way, this is not a reflective cycle, but you could think of it as a reflective cycle, going from the self to the interpersonal reflection. And that's another model of reflection. Yeah. So if you were to ask questions or any of those questions and insert them in one of the models that we've seen before, this is where I was telling you in week 3 that in week 2 that you could actually combine models, being selective, but more than selective, being purposeful. So if you're incorporating that question on the contextual, on stage of reappreciation of Schoen's model, what would be the purpose of it? So why would you do that? And as long as you explicitly state your rationale, that's part of being critical. Now we're going to go back a little bit. Yeah, so from the individual, we move to the social. And we've seen in a video last week of, again, Kurt's work of how to reflect with other people. There's another model that takes us to different stages of how we can interact with others in a reflective way, in a purposeful way, something that, a chat that can be organized in a way that helps us to go deep into reflecting a situation, generating new knowledge, and hopefully, the main purpose in any reflection is to think about how our ideas, how this situation can be applied in another future subsequent situation, which might be similar or not, but how would you apply this now? New knowledge, if the same experience or a similar experience would happen again. So here, I need your input. What benefits then of being critical when you're reflecting? What benefits do you think there are of critical reflection? Any thoughts, ideas?
I think it helps research, your own biases.
Yes.
But also, it can also be in a way of listening to data, as someone who looks at it and is going to be talking to people, female players, not the bias, but the central part of you.
Yes.
Exactly.
And you come then with your experiences, you can relate to your participants, they can relate to you, but you're coming like with a position that we call, is it internal? You have these internal lenses. That's not the word I'm looking for. Insider, outsider. Yes, not internal, external. But yes, it is that insider perspective that no one else, another person doing the same research with the same methodology, would definitely obtain different outcomes. And that again, it goes back to if you're doing research, as I did with Mexican teachers, me being a Mexican teacher, and my participants knowing that I'm Mexican and that I have an understanding of our context, what they decide to tell me, it could be deeper because they know that I can relate, that we connect, that I understand what they're talking about. Whereas if one of the supervisors would do that, probably my male supervisor was probably older than me, who doesn't speak Spanish because my interviews were in Spanish. All the teachers I interviewed would know English. Whatever he elicits from them would be completely different. And as Fred says, having clarity, being transparent in the process, it's just not just about saying, oh, I'm biased, because it's not actually a limitation. It could be completely different, very good insider perspective. But as long as you're explicitly saying and talking about yourself as the researcher, you're not lying to the readers, to the whoever is connecting with your research. You're saying, here, this is who I am as a researcher, and this is how I elicited my data. Being transparent. So Smith is a bit more simplistic by saying, benefits of critical reflection are that it contributes to our lifelong learning skills. And we learn how to identify and negotiate complex issues, examine our positionality, which is what Fred is actually referring to. When you are in research, constantly telling the reader, well, this is how I did it. This is where I'm coming from. This is why I'm adopting this particular theory. As long as you're providing your rationale of your decision-making process, you're being transparent and explicitly stating your positionality. As long as you're doing that, we go back to ideas of trustworthiness. What makes your study trustworthy? And because it is qualitative research, what we're talking about in this case, yes, we want not ideas about validity, because we're not interested in the truth, which is a question that emerged last class. It's more about what makes your study trustworthy. How can I tell people this is a trustworthy research? Right. Let's go back to you then. Spend around 15 minutes talking about your pre-task. It was very, very simple task where you just are encouraged to think about how you have performed reflective practice before. And you can go back to all your previous experiences, school experiences, not individual experiences, and think about this question then based on the readings, because the readings kind of propose different ways of being reflective and utilizing strategies and tools that can help you to reflect. So I would, for instance, keep open on your screen the pre-task questions, and then open apps for the readings. If for some reason you couldn't do the readings, skim through the readings, go back to the yeah, for instance, you can open Smith. You can look at this table here, and Barrett, you could, well, just keep them up, and I don't know why this is not reacting. And you can go, forwards and backwards to these three elements. After that, we have 15 minutes. I'm gonna stop recording as well because we go to group work. Yes, it does talk about the idea of reflection and reflexivity. What is what? How can you distinguish them? In a lot of literature, you'll find them as interchangeable concepts, but this reading does look at these two notions as different because they have different functions. So we have reflection as goal-oriented. Yes, you have to do it as part of your professional life. There's collective action. Okay, so the idea of articulating with others. And the aim is to evaluate your practice. Again, clinical skills. If you are a clinical psychologist, a clinical nurse, a clinical, so it's part of being reflective is a key skill that they should develop. Now, when they talk about reflexivity, okay, this is not just a one moment reflection. Reflexivity is a continuum. It's a continuous activity. It's always linked to previous reflections. Informed by reflection, yes, because you could, again, look at a model and implement it. And the idea is then the purpose of it is to facilitate consideration of understanding of the cultural realities, social realities, and position. That's what we were saying. So reflexivity is more about how you impact the social and the political context. So that has that push towards the social element. And then on the second reading, or the third reading, I don't know what number is that. Yeah, we have the model that we went through. But I think it was this reading here, which I cannot get. One. Yes. So in this second reading by Watson and Wilcox, they said, they kind of take you through this, if you want to learn to reflect, what do you need to know, first of all? And they do talk about Schoen's work of being a reflective practitioner. And they discuss his work, and through questions. And this is what, we always go back to those videos. If you watch them in one, those videos that they ask different questions so that we have models and we have questions in those models, reflective models. And if you want your reflection to be critical, you need to step beyond the descriptive level of telling people what happened. It's more about asking the how did this happen? Why did this happen? So the how and the why questions are always questions that will give you a push to then being more reflective, more critical. And they talk about reflecting by reading. So if you're reading something, how can you reflect on that reading? How can I make my readings meaningful? And this is something, came today, week 3, my students in a different course. That course is on language learning and technology. They do need to read a lot. And one student they're all teachers. I expect as teachers that they know how to reflect. That's not always the case. But then she asked the question, why are we reading this article? And I thought that's a brilliant question. Nobody has asked me, why do I have to read this reading? But the most important question she asked was like, I really don't connect with the reading. So how can I connect with this reading that you're asking me to do? And I think let's go back to the topic. This topic is about, I don't know, what was the topic? I think we're talking about autonomy and digital skills. And by asking her questions, she realized that that's a topic she's not interested in. So therefore she couldn't connect. If that's not relevant to you or to your practice, how can I make you connect with my reading? So then I kind of, not going through this in class, I did say to her, I gave him some strategies about how she can make her reading more meaningful. And sometimes it's about identifying one single element of the reading that, oh, this is interesting. Let me read about this a bit more in detail. Or just, we went back to ideas and strategies of skim reading, scanning, and yeah, if really you cannot connect, there's nothing, as a person, there's nothing interesting, relevant, valuable to you. But at least you know what the reading was about. And you need to read it, I said to her, because it is an introduction to the topic. But if you didn't find that particular reading interesting, there's always, a further reading list of other readings that you can do, which might be interesting to you, I said to her. But I thought that was brilliant. Never I've been asked why do I have to do this reading? So basically, in here we are giving tips about reflecting by reading. And then we go back to what we've discussed last class, capturing and reading stories of practice. And this is where, as I mentioned before, some people, they do reflect more in depth when they articulate a story, something that happened to them with other people. And that's another strategy. You want to engage in reflective practice by telling stories. This is how other people have done it, and these are more tips that you can take about how to make that conversation more meaningful. And there's another bit, collecting and reading conventions of practice. That sounds to me as a more group reflective practice. And again, health professionals would do this a lot and write a lot about their own practice and collect different stories of other practitioners, cases that people have written about, and publish them and talk about them, what makes them important to other practitioners who might encounter similar experiences. Which takes us back then to what you do. I think I've seen another reading, but I don't. Hold on, I'm sure there was another reading. I probably didn't put it. Yes, here, this one. No, I don't want to. Well, for some reason it's not. I'll try to zoom in. But this is another way, and I don't know. I mean, I haven't gone into the details of your own research projects, but if you're interested in you making your research, you want your participants to be more critical about what they're going to share with you, you can actually give them an option of how they can talk about their experiences. So we have, typical write a reflective journal, bring a reflective note, or you might follow the critical incident approach to elicit information. That's only if you're interested in, collecting meaningful stories, or if you're interested in the narrative methodology by asking people to tell you their stories, then this kind of reflective techniques are relevant. You can ask them to create a concept map, to write their story, to tell you the story. There are different processes of writing and speaking. There are two different processes, yeah? In speaking, you might not have the chance to edit what you said or to retract what you said. But writing does have a double how do you call it? Yes. You kind of think about what you're going to say. So it's a double reflective element. Because you need to think about what you want to say, how you're going to say it, and why. And more recently, which I don't think is here, let me see. No, it's not that. Those new methodologies that are more artistic, you know, creating a drawing or painting, photo elicitation, you know, how can I make my participants interested in what I want them to tell me about in their lives, but also meaningful to them. And if we go back to what Fred was saying, people do reflect, but they do it in different ways. So how can I collect something that is reflective, meaningful to the participant, and that is relevant to them? So you could actually give them choice about how, you know, they might tell you about their own lives if narrative and reflection are relevant to your research. There you go.